If you share your authentic reason for writing it, people love that. Now that my kids are growing up a little bit, I see that they have some stress and anxiety. I can't understand it because the world seems so easy to me. It seems like we have everything. But I talk to parents and they say, we also have anxiety about our kids' anxiety. In a world where everyone's a bit soft, how do we strengthen ourselves? How do we toughen ourselves up? And how do we navigate those inevitable failures and bumps in the road? This book is that book for my kids. So it's like, those are the authentic stories of the books, but the more authentic you can share your story, the more people will be attracted to it.
Welcome back. We are doing a 10-part series with Neil Pasricha on how to sell 1 million+ books. This is episode 7, where we're talking about doing the launch hustle. What do you got, man?
Okay, well, it's almost like you just, on the last video we just did, right, chapter 7, episode 7.
This is 7. Last one was 6.
Okay, on 6.
Planting to launch seeds.
Planning to launch seeds. We just basically, you squeezed out of me.
Okay.
You got to work like full time for 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
And I'm like, do I really do that? I mean, I guess I do. But now we're talking about the actual launch hustle.
Yep.
Now you do.
Okay. This is like the book is out today.
Yeah.
Okay.
You are going. I think you need to treat a book launch like a full-time job for as long as you can afford to.
Okay.
Okay. So some people are like, well, I have a full-time job, so this might not work. Other people might say, well, I'm working on some other project. This happens to a lot of people, right? They're like, I have a full-time YouTube channel I'm running. I have a full-time podcast I'm doing. Like, I can't dedicate 3 to 6 months. But if you got nothing else going on, or you're able to sublimate, what's the word? Like, put that stuff under this, lower prioritize that stuff, then I'm saying go 3 to 6 months with your book launch being your full-time job.
Wow, okay.
Okay. Parts of that might be things that the publisher organizes for you or with you, a book tour maybe do some bookstore events, right? Maybe do some PR, some press. But I need you, if you really want to sell 1 million books, you have to think of it like a book launch is like your full-time job for 3 to 6 months. Okay, so the first thing you got to do, right before your book comes out, right as your book coming out, is thinking, okay, I just spent 2 years writing my book, selling my book, editing my book, designing my book, working on my book, and right at the end, you have to think, wait a minute, no one cares about my book. No one knows who I am. I mean nothing in the grand scheme of the universe. What people are caring about or thinking about is a question mark that you have to answer.
Okay.
What's in the news? What are the major trends? What are the natural issues of our times? What's the national conversation that's happening? Okay? So, is it about free speech? Is it about rising anxiety trends in adolescence? Is it about bullying? Is it about gun violence? Find those things. Find those things and figure out how or if your work fits into that naturally. So I'm saying you spend 2 years writing this thing, now you got your work of art, it's all ready to go, and right before it comes out, you gotta think, wait a minute, I mean nothing. What's everyone else talking about? And only if you can answer that question can you do what I think is most important, is write your talking points, okay? So when the Book of Awesome came out, I was working at Walmart. I worked there for 10 years. There's a guy in the PR department. He's like, oh, your book's coming out next week. I said, yeah. He said, what are your talking points? I was like, what's a talking point? What are you talking about? Okay. He's like, you know, your 4 or 5 points. I was like, what 4 or 5 points? What are you talking about? He's like, well, what are you going to say when you're interviewed? And I'm like, I'm going to answer whatever they ask me. He's like, oh, no, don't answer whatever they ask you. Figure out what you're trying to tell them. So I worked with this guy. His name is Kevin. He was working with me at Walmart. He's like, oh, my gosh. He's like, right now everyone's talking about anxiety, okay? He's like, does this help with that? I said, well, yeah, of course it helps with that. I'm using it to get out of my own, you know, I went through a divorce. I lost a friend, so of course it's helping with my mental. He's like, perfect. So why don't you say, you know, that is one of your lines, and for those who are battling with mental illness or depression, they'll relate to that. So there's one talking point. What else? And he kept pushing me on this thing until I had like 4 or 5 sentences that literally became, Evan, I'm not joking, the same interview I did 50 times, right? But your talking points are actually hung on your book's content and the national conversation. You've got to slip into something that people are already thinking and talking about. I'm not saying that this would have fit into gun violence.
Right.
Like, you can't connect what doesn't exist. But I'm saying there's big conversations happening out there that you are not part of. Could you be part of them? How so?
Right.
Right?
So what was a big one for you for this one, Book of Awesome?
Book of Awesome was, at the time the Book of Awesome came out in 2010.
2010.
Yeah, it was like stock market's at an all-time low. Ice caps are melting. There's like huge unemployment rates. There's pirates. Like literally, there was pirates in the seas. I don't know if you remember, that's a big story about pirates. So the talking point is, in a world that's gone to crap, you know what I mean? Like, cheer yourself up the way I cheer myself up, you know, one awesome thing a day in order to put myself in a better mood. Here I am a year later. Am I perfectly fixed? No, but in a world where the news is so heavy, this book gave me a little break.
Right.
So anyone that was listening was like, wait a minute, that's me. I'm so depressed by the news. It's overwhelming. I've lost my job. They connect with that, okay? With this book, I'm discovering, and I know it's partly, some of it should naturally happen once you write it, is like, there's a lot of anxiety. Mental illness is rising. Depression's rising. Loneliness is rising. There's a reason why we put, and you can't see it in the frame here, but it says the subheadline is 9 Secrets to Getting Stronger and Living an Intentional Life. We put that phrase getting stronger in there because I was like, that's what's missing for me and for a lot of people is strength. Right now in the world with how much stress there is, we have 2 choices. We can hide at home and put our heads under the covers, or we can thicken our skin and be ready to face that future with a more confident and a more kind of able-bodied approach to the stresses that are going to come our way. And so I haven't weaved it into a talking point yet, but you see, a talking point is a small, simple sentence that people can get and understand. That's why your book is relevant for the times. Because if it's not relevant for the times, it's not relevant.
And is that channel specific? So if you're going to do a national newspaper, obviously you're targeting national topics. If you're going to come on to an entrepreneur channel, you're going to talk about it, how it relates to entrepreneurship.
Sure.
Is that?
Yeah, so I think write the talking points as a core first, right?
So that would be like strength.
Yeah, so this one's
intentional living.
Exactly. So
right.
the themes that come out of the book naturally,
right?
And some of them might come from specific chapters,
right?
So I have a whole chapter in here about how to be a big fish in a small pond. I have a whole thing. It was a story that the dean of Harvard told me about when I was there, and it was like I think I've used it my whole life. When I started speaking, I asked to speak in the lowest speaking bracket, not the highest, because I wanted to like practice on smaller stages. So I share that story, and it's like, maybe that would work well on a channel that's to do with getting out of a breakup, or post-divorce, or after losing your job, because you're trying to build your confidence back up. So then I can use that talking point. So it's like, yeah, you got to write your talking points to your book, but then to your point, you have to tell them who you're talking with.
Right.
But if you don't, 2 weeks before my book came out, or a week before, the guy's like, what are you talking about? So I was like, I don't know what you're like. I thought you just answered. You have to know what you're going to say first and how it hooks into. Why should anyone have you on their TV show? Why should anyone have you on the radio show? What's the reason? You have to know the answer to that.
I'm assuming with a lot of these talking points, there's multiple stories underneath that you could potentially tell. So if you're talking about growing stronger, it could be about how to deal with divorce, how to deal with a friend dying, how to deal with trying to sell a new book, how to deal with rejection from whatever, how to deal with walking away from a publisher. It could all be related to growing stronger, but the story that you tell could be contextual to the audience that you're talking to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I asked, before I did this video, obviously I was I was like, I'm going to talk about how to sell 1 million books. I was like, I never talked about this before. Like, I'm nervous to do this video. I was like, this is a question I've never been asked. I always just told people, like, just happened random. Like, I don't know. But you forced me to think about it. So I gave it a lot of thought. And I also interviewed other authors who've done it. And I've asked them, what do you think works? And the thing that came back from a few authors, which I think is related to this point about talking points, is find a controversy. In particular, try to find something that people agree or disagree with in equal parts. And sometimes the controversy can be made known to you. So this book is called The Happiness Equation. It has 9 secrets in it. One of them is called Never Retire. That's a big thing I wrote about, whatever, I didn't think much of it. It's certainly something I believe. I had all the research in there. I have lots of reasons why you should never retire. If you want to be happy, don't retire. Retiring, you're giving up I have all this research about it. You're giving up your social connections, you're giving up the structure in your life,
Yeah.
you're giving up the learning, you're giving up the story, you're part of something bigger. Don't retire, it's dumb, right? Turns out people who are retired don't like to hear that.
Right.
So I'm suddenly doing national call-in radio shows, taking calls, like me and the host, and they're like, well, I don't know what this guy thinks. I'm retired and I love playing golf every day, so you're a bozo. And I was like, but what you're hearing there is something that's controversial.
Yeah.
So then I wrote an article about that chapter
Yeah.
for Harvard Business Review. It went viral. Like it gets a lot of pickup. So then I'm talking to you now 3 years after this came out. Tomorrow I'm on national NPR radio talking about never retire. Still 3 years later. I did the launch hustle 3 years ago. But still that point turned out to be controversial. And if it's controversial, people want to talk about it. I had another chapter in that book called How to Make More Money Than a Harvard MBA. Okay? Now that title is purposely controversial. And you can do that. Like The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That's a purposely controversial title.
Yeah.
Nobody works 4 hours a week. Everyone works 40. Tim does certainly not work 4 hours a week.
Right.
But the title has baked in controversy. So you're like, what? What does that mean? How can you do that? How will I discover? You know, how about Chris Guillebeau, the $100 startup?
Yeah.
Controversial. How can you start a company for $100? Probably, I don't know, I haven't asked Chris directly, I'm gonna guess that's his best-selling book, because it's the most controversial title. How about The 1 Minute Manager? Huge, popular, million-copy best-selling book. How do you manage somebody in 1 minute? In fact, 4-Hour Workweek is kind of like related to that,
Yeah.
right? Even the things that are like, you know, like eat chocolate and be skinny, or like, I'm making it up,
Right.
but like if it's so outlandishly controversial, of course people are gonna wanna talk about it. They wanna know why you're full of crap
Right.
to try to disprove you, or they wanna see what you're selling and the remote chance you might be telling something truthful, right?
So back to what we've talked on in
Yeah.
previous videos, most of it is still, like, it's still to be authentic, still to
Yeah,
be core to your message.
of course.
You believe in not retiring.
I do.
But then it's looking through your content and saying, okay, what in here could be controversial in this modern time?
Exactly. Or literally what question, like that Callin show thing, it came up, I learned it
You
was
didn't expect it
I
to
didn't
be-
know. It
got
was
it.
because the host read my book
Right.
and he kept picking on that. So I was like, why is he picking on? And then the calls kept coming and they were angry at me. And I'm like, I'm the awesome guy. No one yells at me usually.
Right.
But they're yelling at me and I'm like, then you realize there's something there.
So what's controversial in here?
So many things are in this book. So one of the most controversial things I say is this idea of telling yourself a different story.
Okay.
Okay, so for my podcast, 3 books, I interviewed Seth Godin, and one of his 3 most formative books, the whole premise of my podcast is tell me the 3 books that changed your life, was a book called The Book of Est. Okay? So Erhard seminars training from like the 70s. He read the book, it hit him, and he realized, I go to a good school. I'm actually not too badly off. Yet the story in my mind is that I'm, aw shucks, I'm always like, I'm pessimistic, I'm glass half empty. Most people are like this in general. And he's like, I just realized I could just tell myself a different story. So I researched this topic for the book, and turns out, you might say it's ignorance is bliss, but I'm gonna go out in this book and say, honestly, if you're getting through a breakup, if you're getting through a divorce, and I go through my own things in here, and I won't go through them in depth now, but I talk about like body issues I've had, all this stuff like that. Just tell yourself a different story, man. Like just almost like lie to yourself, okay? Like I have a chapter in here called Have You Had Enough One-Night Stands?
Right.
Kind of a controversial title. The premise of that is that when you go through a breakup, there's research that shows that the average person has 16 relationships, has 16 one-night stands, has broken up with 3 times, has cheated on once, like all this whole litany of terrible stuff that you would never want. But the research shows that that's the average steps that the average person goes through to get to a solid, loving marriage, if they get to that. So the question to ask yourself when you go through these breakups is, have you had enough of them? Because that's the path to get there. That's the path to get there. So tell yourself a different story, meaning that if something really bad happened, just lie to yourself to get out of it.
Right.
Okay? Like get your mindset snapped out of it. And 2 is, have you had enough one-night stands? You personally, Evan Carmichael, have you? No, I'm just kidding.
But that's
Because you haven't had enough. And
Right.
and my point is, it's enough of a headline that it could grab someone's
Right. So would you do a call-in show with like, hey, give me your worst problems? Give me what you're buried under a mountain of crap right now, and you feel like you have the worst life of any human alive. Call in, and then you say, hey, let me fix your story. Like
exactly the kind of stuff you could talk about, or like literally, like I think right now in the world, and that's partly why I wrote the book, is we feel like crap.
Yeah.
In general, as people. Like we live in the most abundant time ever in human civilization, and yet we're the least happy to be here. Loneliness rates have doubled since the 1980s. 40% of us live alone now, more than ever before. Anxiety is up, mental illness is up, depression's up, suicide's up. What's going on?
Yeah.
And when you talk to people, it's like, well, I compare myself to others on Instagram, I've got social anxiety, I never turn my phone off, I'm sleeping. There's all this litany of technological stuff and psychological stuff that's happening to us. So part of the premise of You Are Awesome is to go through all of that and remind us that, you know what, you are awesome. Mm-hmm. And here's some of the ways to rethink the failures and stresses and pitfalls you're having in your life so that you can get through them and get over them and be okay. Part of the reason I wrote this book is because something's going to happen to me at some point. I'm not going to be here forever. Like, chances are my kids are still going to be alive. And I know that their life is relatively soft. There's no starvation. There's no famine. There's no Great Depression. There's no economic collapse. We got clean water in our taps. Mm-hmm. So when they hit real hardfalls, real hardships, a real breakup, a real divorce, loss of a friend, an accident, an illness, loss of job, they're not going to be equipped with the tool set to get through it. So the book is an offering to people, like my children, on like how to navigate those challenges when they come, because we're all an army of porcelain dolls right now. You get a nasty email from your boss, people cry about it for 3 days. Like, we're soft. Me too. So this is a book to toughen ourselves up.
Okay. What I loved in that sentence was also you said part of the reason why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a reason why.
You gotta have that.
And you wrote that in 2010.
So exactly. So if you share that, if you share your authentic reason for writing it, people love that. I was going through a divorce and I lost a good friend. I wrote an awesome thing a day for 1,000 straight days. When I got remarried, my wife Leslie told me she was pregnant on the plane home from our honeymoon. When we landed in Toronto, I wrote a 300-page love letter to my unborn child on how to live a happy life. That's this book. After we had children, my children inspire me to see the world through their eyes. They love being rained on. They love playing in the sand. This is a reminder to adults and children of all ages on how to see awesome everywhere. Now that my kids are growing up a little bit, I see that they have some stress and anxiety. I can't understand it because the world seems so easy to me. It seems like we have everything. But I talk to parents, other parents, and they say, we also have anxiety about our kids' anxiety. In a world where everyone's a bit soft, how do we strengthen ourselves? How do we toughen ourselves up? And how do we navigate those inevitable failures and bumps in the road? This book is that book for my kids. So it's like, those are the authentic stories of the books, but then people will be gripped a bit more by it because you're vulnerable enough to share it. Not everyone goes on TV talking about their divorce. It's not like I was not comfortable doing that at the beginning. I just said, I wrote this I like warm underwear from the dryer. Like my talking points originally had nothing to do with that. I was not comfortable at first. But the more authentic you can share your story, the more people will be attracted to it.
Well, we started off this clip talking about how you have to make your message fit the times.
Yes.
I guess what's going through my head is the reason why you wrote the book also fits the times.
Because you're living in the times.
Exactly. You're a product of the
times. So no matter who's watching this video right now, chances are the thing you're writing is relevant.
Right.
Because otherwise you wouldn't have written it.
So just explaining that story.
Wrote it. I'm a writer. I said writ. Don't edit that out. That's funny.
But explaining the story, the reason, the authentic, vulnerable piece of why you're creating, even with fiction, like why do you create these fictional characters?
Yeah.
What's the story behind it?
There's always themes underneath the story,
course.
Right?
And explain it. If art makes people feel, and writing is art.
Exactly.
And so what's the feeling that you had in creating this? What's the intention behind it, and then being able to share it?
So I interviewed Angie Thomas for my podcast. She wrote a book called The Hate You Give. It's a fiction, young adult novel, sold many millions of copies. It's about a black unarmed teen getting shot by a white police officer.
Okay.
as a young adult book. When you talk to her, she's angry about racism in our society.
Right.
And that is palpable when you read her beautiful fictional tale of what happens in a society, in a village, in a school, when somebody is shot, an unarmed black teen is shot by a police officer. Of course the book sold millions of copies because it touched on the deep emotional nerve center that she felt so passionately about that we could feel while reading it.
And whatever you're feeling going through, chances are there's a ton of people feeling the same thing.
Here's the first rule to selling a million books: feel something.
Yeah.
And make that feeling go into your work. If you got nothing inside you, then you can't have anything on the paper.
So once again, this is a 10-part series on how to sell a million plus books with Neil Pasricha. Coming up next, episode 8, sign. The link to watch is right there. Continue to believe, and we'll see you there.